The gilded invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier in pristine white gloves to my Manhattan office overlooking Central Park. Sterling Industries cordially invites you to the annual philanthropy gala at the Plaza Hotel. Black tie required. The embossed gold lettering caught the autumn sunlight streaming through my floor-to-ceiling windows. I set the invitation down on my mahogany desk and leaned back in my leather chair. 18 months of negotiations had led to this moment. The Sterling family, old money, older prejudices, needed my technology patents for their expansion into renewable energy. $900 million, the largest deal of my career and potentially theirs. My assistant Maria knocked and entered with her usual morning coffee ritual. "The Sterling Gala invitation arrived, I see," she said, noting the cream-colored cardstock. At 62, Maria had worked with me for over a decade, watching me build my company from a garage startup to a major player in green technology. "They're finally ready to play nice," I said, though something in my gut twisted. "Schedule a fitting for tomorrow and confirm our attendance." The next few days blurred together in a whirlwind of preparation. My company, GreenTech Solutions, had developed revolutionary solar panel efficiency technology that could reduce costs by 40% while increasing output. The Sterling family's manufacturing empire could scale it globally, but they'd made it clear that this gala was as much about acceptance into their social circle as it was about business. I'd grown up in Queens, the son of a mechanic and a school teacher. My parents had worked 3 jobs between them to put me through MIT. Now, at 45, I employed over 3,000 people and held 17 patents that were reshaping the renewable energy sector. But to families like the Sterlings, I would always be new money, an upstart who didn't understand how things were done. The night of the gala, I stood before my bedroom mirror adjusting my bow tie. The Armani tuxedo fit perfectly, tailored to conceal the slight paunch that came with too many business dinners and not enough time at the gym. My wife, Sarah, had passed away from cancer 3 years earlier, and I'd thrown myself into work as a way to cope. This deal wasn't just about money, it was about proving that her belief in me hadn't been misplaced. The Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom gleamed under the light of massive crystal chandeliers. Manhattan's elite mingled beneath painted ceilings that had witnessed a century of similar gatherings. I recognized faces from Forbes covers, political power brokers, and titans of industry. The air was thick with expensive perfume, aged whiskey, and the subtle tension that always accompanied gatherings of the ultra-wealthy. "Mr. Richardson," a booming voice cut through the chamber music. Harrison Sterling III approached with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world. Tall, silver-haired, and impeccably dressed, he embodied everything Manhattan high society aspired to be. "So glad you could join us." We shook hands, his grip firm but brief, a businessman's handshake rather than a welcome between friends. "Thank you for the invitation, Harrison. Beautiful event. Family tradition," he said, his smile not quite reaching his steel-gray eyes. "We've been hosting this gala for 37 years, started by my father, continued by me, and someday," he gestured toward a group of younger adults near the bar. "Well, legacy is everything, isn't it?" I nodded, recognizing the subtle message. This wasn't just a charity event. It was a demonstration of power, of belonging to something larger and more enduring than any individual success. The evening progressed with the choreographed precision of high society events. Cocktails led to dinner to speeches about charitable causes that would receive 6-figure donations as casually as most people tipped at restaurants. I found myself seated at table 12, not quite close enough to the head table to be considered in a circle, but not relegated to the back either, a careful positioning that spoke volumes. During the salmon course, I struck up conversation with the other guests at my table. There was Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a cardiovascular surgeon from Mount Sinai, Robert Chen, who'd built a logistics empire, and Margaret Foster, whose family foundation focused on education reform. Normal, accomplished people who'd earned their seats through merit rather than inheritance. "I've been following your work in renewable energy," Dr. Walsh said, cutting into her fish with surgical precision. "The efficiency improvements you've achieved could revolutionize rural healthcare in developing countries." That's the goal, I replied. Clean, affordable energy access should be a human right, not a luxury. Spoken like someone who's never had to balance idealism with shareholders, came a voice from the neighboring table. I turned to see Victoria Sterling, Harrison's daughter, regarding me with the kind of smile that didn't bode well. At 38, she'd spent her entire adult life in boardrooms, wielding her family's influence with the precision of a scalpel. I find that idealism and profit aren't mutually exclusive, I responded evenly. Some of the most successful companies in history were built on solving real problems for real people. Victoria's laugh was crystalline and cold. How refreshingly naive. Tell me, Mr. Richardson, what charity are you supporting tonight? I assume you've prepared a suitably impressive donation to match your principles. The question hung in the air like a challenge. I'd planned to donate $50,000, a substantial sum by any reasonable measure, but I suddenly realized it would pale in comparison to whatever the Sterling family and their peers would contribute. Education reform, I said simply. $100,000 to Mrs. Foster's foundation. I caught Margaret Foster's surprised expression out of the corner of my eye. It was twice what I'd originally planned, but something about Victoria's tone had gotten under my skin. How generous, Victoria said, though her tone suggested the opposite. Harrison, did you hear? Mr. Richardson is contributing to education reform. Perhaps he could share some of his background with us. Harrison looked up from his conversation with the man beside him, Senator Phillips, if I remembered correctly. Background? I was just thinking how inspiring it must be, Victoria continued, her voice carrying to several nearby tables, to see someone rise from such humble beginnings. Queens, wasn't it? Your father was a mechanic. The conversations around us began to quiet. I felt the weight of dozens of eyes turning in our direction. This wasn't casual dinner conversation. It was a test, maybe even an ambush. He was, I said, pride and caution warring in my voice. Owned his own shop for 30 years. Put 3 kids through college on what he earned fixing cars and trucks for working families. Ha! How admirable, said James Sterling, Victoria's younger brother, who'd apparently been listening from another table. There's something so authentic about manual labor, don't you think? So far removed from all this. He gestured around the opulent ballroom. I began to understand what was happening. This wasn't about my charitable donation or even small talk about my background. This was about putting me in my place, reminding me that no matter how successful my company became, I would never truly belong in their world. I think authentic might be exactly the right word, I said carefully. My father taught me that honest work, regardless of whether you're turning wrenches or negotiating contracts, deserves respect. Of course, Victoria agreed, her smile sharpening. Though I suppose there's a difference between honest work and, she paused meaningfully, the kind of aggressive business tactics we've been hearing about. Wasn't there some controversy with your patents? Something about prior art claims? My chest tightened. She was referring to a lawsuit from 2 years ago. A competitor had claimed that one of my key patents built on their previous research. We'd won decisively, with the court ruling that my innovations were entirely original. But the case had dragged through the business press for months, generating exactly the kind of negative publicity that families like the Sterlings would consider déclassé. The courts found no merit to those claims, I said, keeping my voice level. Innovation often challenges established players. It's the nature of progress. The courts, Harrison mused, as if the concept was somehow distasteful. Yes, well, legal victories and social acceptance aren't always the same thing, are they? The message was becoming clearer by the minute. Despite 18 months of negotiations, despite my company's technology being exactly what Sterling Industries needed, despite the $900 million on the table, they saw this evening as an opportunity to remind me of my place in their hierarchy. Dr. Walsh shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Robert Chen had gone very quiet, recognizing the social minefield that dinner conversation had become. Around us, other guests were pretending not to listen while hanging on every word. Mr. Richardson, Victoria continued, I'm curious about your thoughts on legacy, family legacy specifically. Do you think someone can ever truly transcend their origins, or are we all ultimately products of where we come from? It was a loaded question designed to elicit either false humility or defensive arrogance. Either response would mark me as an outsider trying too hard to fit in. I took a sip of wine, a Bordeaux that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, and considered my response. Around me, Manhattan's most powerful families waited to see how the upstart from Queens would handle being put in his place. The weight of expectant silence pressed down on our corner of the ballroom. Crystal glasses caught the chandelier light, creating tiny rainbows that danced across white tablecloths. I could feel the attention of nearby tables focusing on our exchange, conversations dropping to whispers as Manhattan's elite prepared to witness either my capitulation or my downfall. "Legacy is interesting," I finally said, meeting Victoria's gaze directly. "I think the most meaningful legacies are the ones we build through our actions, not the ones we inherit through our surnames." Victoria's smile became predatory. "How philosophical. Though I wonder if you truly believe that, or if it's simply what someone in your position needs to believe." James Sterling leaned forward, sensing blood in the water. "Victoria raises a fascinating point about social mobility. There's always been debate about whether new wealth can ever really integrate with established society, or if the differences are simply too fundamental." "What kind of differences?" Dr. Walsh interjected, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of conversation. As someone who'd also worked her way up from modest beginnings, she recognized the subtle class warfare being waged. "Oh, small things," Victoria said airily. "Customs, traditions, understanding of how things are done. For instance," she gestured toward my place setting. "Mr. Richardson, I noticed you've been using the dessert spoon for your soup. Perfectly understandable mistake. The rules can be quite arbitrary if you weren't raised with them." Heat flooded my cheeks. I glanced down at the silver in my hands, realizing I'd indeed grabbed the wrong utensil. It was a minor error, the kind of social misstep that would go unnoticed in most circles, but loomed large in this rarefied world of unspoken protocols and inherited knowledge. "The soup spoon is the larger one on the right," James added helpfully, his tone suggesting he was doing me a tremendous favor. "Easy to miss if you're not used to formal dining." "Thank you," I said quietly, switching utensils while trying to maintain what remained of my dignity. Around us, I caught glimpses of knowing looks and barely concealed smirks. The Queen's mechanic's son, caught out by silverware etiquette. Harrison Sterling had been watching this exchange with the detached interest of someone observing a mildly entertaining theater performance. "You know, Richardson, this conversation reminds me of something my father used to say. He'd talk about the difference between earning money and understanding wealth. Money, he'd say, is just numbers in an account. Wealth is about belonging to something larger than yourself. Traditions, responsibilities, a way of being in the world that transcends any individual transaction." Senator Phillips, who'd been quietly nursing his brandy, nodded sagely. "Wise words, Harrison. There's a reason some families have maintained their influence for generations, while others," he let the sentence hang unfinished, "rise and fall with the market cycles," Victoria completed. "No offense, Mr. Richardson, but technology companies are notoriously volatile. Here today, gone tomorrow. Family institutions like Sterling Industries have weathered the Civil War, 2 world wars, the Great Depression. There's something to be said for that kind of stability." I set down my wineglass carefully, using the moment to collect my thoughts. These people weren't just questioning my business acumen. They were systematically dismantling my credentials to sit at their table, to be part of their world, to be trusted with their family's legacy. Stability is certainly valuable, I agreed, though I'd argue that adaptability might be even more important in today's economy. The companies that survived those historical upheavals you mentioned were the ones that evolved with changing circumstances, not the ones that clung to tradition for its own sake. "Adaptability," James mused. "Is that what you call it? When you undercut established pricing structures by 40%, some might call that predatory business practices." The accusation hung in the air like smoke from an expensive cigar. They were referring to my company's strategy of pricing our technology competitively to gain market share. Standard business practice in the tech sector, but apparently viewed as unsportsmanlike conduct by old money manufacturers. I call it providing value to customers, I responded. Isn't that what capitalism is supposed to be about? Efficiency, innovation, better products at better prices. In theory, Harrison said with a slight smile, though there's something to be said for maintaining industry standards, respecting established relationships. The energy sector has operated on certain principles for decades. When someone comes in and disrupts those relationships, he shrugged elegantly. It can be seen as disrespectful, Victoria finished. Even aggressive. Dr. Walsh looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. Robert Chen was studying his plate with intense concentration. Margaret Foster caught my eye and gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head, a warning to drop the subject before it escalated further. But I was past the point of polite retreat. 18 months of careful negotiations, months of proving my company's worth, weeks of preparation for this evening, and they were treating me like an interloper who'd somehow snuck into their private club. I'm sorry if providing better technology at competitive prices seems aggressive, I said, my voice carrying further than I'd intended. I was under the impression that Sterling Industries wanted a business partner, not a supplicant. The words fell into sudden silence. Conversations at nearby tables stopped entirely. Even the string quartet seemed to pause between movements. I'd crossed some invisible line, challenged the hierarchy in a way that couldn't be ignored or smoothed over. Harrison's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Partnership implies mutual respect, Richardson, understanding of how business is conducted in certain circles. And how is that exactly? I asked, my composure finally cracking. With veiled insults about my background? With lessons in silverware etiquette designed to embarrass me in front of your peers? With passive-aggressive comments about my business practices? Victoria's mask of polite interest slipped entirely. Mr. Richardson, I think you're misunderstanding the tone of our conversation. Am I? I stood up, my chair scraping against the marble floor. The sound echoed through the suddenly quiet ballroom. Because from where I sit, this feels less like dinner conversation and more like a ritualized humiliation designed to remind me of my place in your social order. Harrison also rose, his height advantage adding to his commanding presence. I think you're overreacting to what was intended as friendly conversation about different backgrounds and experiences. Friendly conversation. I repeated the phrase slowly, looking around at the faces watching us. Is that what you call questioning my business ethics, my social credentials, my family's worthiness? Because where I come from, we have different words for that kind of conversation. James Sterling had gone pale. Richardson, you're making a scene. Am I? I looked around the ballroom, taking in the sea of faces turned toward our table. You know what? You're absolutely right. I am making a scene. And do you know why? I reached into my jacket pocket and withdrew the contract folder I'd brought, the preliminary agreement for the $900 million deal we'd spent months negotiating. The papers felt heavy in my hands, weighted with months of work, years of building toward this moment. Because I just realized something, I continued, my voice carrying clearly across the marble floors and gilded walls. You never intended this to be a partnership between equals. This entire evening, hell, this entire negotiation process has been about establishing a hierarchy with Sterling Industries at the top and GreenTech Solutions grateful for whatever scraps fall from your table. Victoria's composure cracked. That's not... You're mischaracterizing. Am I? I opened the contract folder, revealing the carefully drafted terms we'd spent months negotiating. Because suddenly I'm wondering what other aspects of our arrangement have been designed to remind me of my proper place. The licensing terms that favor your company's existing partnerships. The exclusivity clauses that prevent me from working with your competitors. The renewal options that give you all the leverage. Harrison's voice became dangerously quiet. Richardson, I suggest you sit down and lower your voice. You're embarrassing yourself. No, I said, feeling a strange sense of clarity wash over me. I don't think I'm the one who should be embarrassed here. The ballroom had gone completely silent, except for the soft clink of servers clearing plates and the distant hum of Manhattan traffic far below. 300 of the most powerful people in New York were watching this confrontation unfold like spectators at a particularly brutal tennis match. You want to know about legacy? I asked, looking around at the sea of faces. About understanding wealth versus just earning money. Here's what I understand. Real power doesn't need to humiliate people to assert itself. Real confidence doesn't require putting others down to build yourself up. And real class, genuine class, treats people with respect, regardless of where they come from or how they got there. I closed the contract folder and held it against my chest. 18 months ago, you came to me because you needed my technology. Not wanted, needed. Your company's expansion into renewable energy depends on the innovations my team and I developed. We could have made each other incredibly wealthy while actually making a positive difference in the world. Harrison's jaw tightened. The offer still stands, Richardson, but I suggest you remember who needs whom in this arrangement. You know what? I said, feeling lighter than I had all evening. I think I've been asking myself the wrong question. Instead of wondering whether I belong in your world, maybe I should be asking whether your world is worth belonging to. Senator Phillips cleared his throat. Richardson, perhaps we should discuss this privately. Privately, I laughed, and the sound echoed off the painted ceiling. No, I think this is exactly where this conversation should happen. In front of all your friends and peers and business associates. Because this isn't really about business anymore, is it? This is about power and respect and who gets to sit at which table. I looked directly at Harrison Sterling, seeing him clearly for the first time, not as a potential partner or a gateway to greater success, but as exactly what he'd shown himself to be, a man so secure in his inherited position that he couldn't imagine treating an outsider as an equal. The thing is, I continued, you're right about one thing. We are from different worlds, but that doesn't make one world better than the other. It just makes them different. And after tonight, I'm not sure I want to be part of a world that requires stepping on other people to maintain its elevation. Victoria finally found her voice. You're making a terrible mistake, Richardson. Sterling Industries has connections, influence, resources that you'll never have access to without us. You're throwing away the opportunity of a lifetime over a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding, I repeated. No, Victoria, I think I understand perfectly. The contract folder felt substantial in my hands as I stood there in the center of Manhattan's most exclusive social gathering, surrounded by centuries of inherited wealth and influence. The silence stretched on, broken only by the soft rustle of expensive fabric as 300 guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, uncertain whether they were witnessing a business negotiation or a social execution. Harrison Sterling's face had gone ashen, though whether from anger or shock I couldn't tell. Richardson, he said quietly, I think you need to consider very carefully what you're about to do. I have been, I replied, for the past hour actually. While you and your family have been systematically demonstrating why someone like me could never be a true partner in your enterprise, only a well-compensated vendor. Senator Phillips leaned forward. Son, emotions are running high. Perhaps we should take a breath, step away from the table. With respect, Senator, my emotions are perfectly clear, probably the clearest they've been in months. I opened the contract folder again, looking down at the terms we'd negotiated. Licensing agreements, exclusivity clauses, renewal options, all carefully crafted to benefit Sterling Industries, while giving my company just enough to make the deal seem equitable. Dr. Walsh, who'd remained quiet throughout the confrontation, spoke up. Mr. Richardson, whatever's happening here tonight doesn't have to define your business relationship, doesn't it? I looked at her, appreciating her attempt to diffuse the situation. Dr. Walsh, you seem like a reasonable person. Let me ask you something. If you were negotiating a partnership with a hospital and they spent the evening questioning your medical training, your background, your worthiness to practice medicine, would you trust them to treat you fairly in that partnership? She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it, understanding the point. You see, I continued, turning back to Harrison, the problem isn't that your family has money and influence and connections going back generations. The problem is that you believe those things make you inherently superior to people who've earned their success differently. James Sterling finally found his voice. That's not. You're putting words in our mouths. Am I? I gestured around the ballroom. Look around, James. Count how many people in this room didn't inherit at least part of their wealth. Count how many started with nothing and built something from scratch. I'll wait. The challenge hung in the air. We all knew the answer. Even the self-made billionaires in attendance had started with advantages, elite educations, family connections, seed capital from relatives that set them apart from true working-class origins. That's not the point, Victoria said, her composure beginning to crack. This is about understanding how business is conducted at a certain level. No, I interrupted. This is about maintaining a social order where people know their place, where new money defers to old money, where outsiders are grateful for acceptance, where innovation takes a back seat to tradition. I pulled out the signature page of the contract, the document that would have bound my company to Sterling Industries for the next decade. $900 million. More money than I'd ever dreamed of growing up in Queens. More money than my father made in his entire lifetime of honest work. Harrison, you asked about legacy earlier, about what we leave behind. I held up the contract. My father taught me something that your father apparently never taught you, that how you treat people when you have power over them reveals who you really are. Harrison's voice became dangerously quiet. And how exactly have we mistreated you, Richardson, by inviting you to our gala, by including you in our social circle, by offering you a contract that would make you and your investors incredibly wealthy, by making it clear that invitation, inclusion, and wealth all come with conditions. That I'm welcome here as long as I remember my place, defer to your superior breeding, and accept that being in business with you means accepting your judgment about what's appropriate, what's acceptable, what's respectable. The last word came out with more bitterness than I'd intended. Around us, I could see guests pulling out their phones, no doubt texting about the dramatic confrontation unfolding before them. By tomorrow morning, this would be the talk of Manhattan's business circles. Margaret Foster, who'd remained diplomatically silent throughout the evening, cleared her throat. Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding about intentions. Mrs. Foster, I appreciate your attempt at diplomacy, but there's been no misunderstanding. I looked directly at her. Your foundation does important work in education. You understand the value of creating opportunities for people regardless of their background. Do you think the Sterling family shares that philosophy? She glanced nervously between me and Harrison, clearly unwilling to take sides in what had become a very public confrontation. I thought so, I said softly. Victoria stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the marble floor. This is ridiculous. You're throwing away a $900 million deal because you feel somehow slighted by dinner conversation? Do you have any idea how that's going to look to your investors, your employees, the business press? Actually, Victoria, I know exactly how it's going to look, and you know what? For the first time tonight, I'm completely comfortable with that. I walked around the table to face Harrison directly. Despite his height advantage, despite his commanding presence, despite the weight of his family's century of influence, he suddenly looked smaller than he had all evening. Harrison, you said that legal victories and social acceptance aren't the same thing. You're absolutely right. But here's what you don't understand. I don't need your social acceptance. I never did. You need our manufacturing capacity, he said coldly. Our distribution networks, our relationships with suppliers and regulators, and I need what your company can provide, I corrected. I don't need what your family represents. There's a difference. The distinction seemed to hit him like a physical blow. For the first time, he appeared to understand that this wasn't just about hurt feelings or social awkwardness. This was about fundamental incompatibility between two different ways of viewing business, success, and human worth. Richardson, Senator Phillips tried again. Surely we can find some middle ground here. Senator, with all due respect, some positions don't have middle ground. Either you treat people as equals or you don't. Either you judge them by their contributions or you judge them by their pedigree. There's no compromise position between respect and condescension. I turned back to Harrison, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time since we'd started negotiations 18 months ago. Not as a gateway to greater success, not as a necessary evil to endure for financial gain, but as someone whose values were fundamentally incompatible with my own. You know what the tragedy is here? I asked quietly. Your company really does need my technology, and my technology could genuinely benefit from your manufacturing and distribution capabilities. We could have built something remarkable together. We could have revolutionized renewable energy while making enormous profits for everyone involved. Harrison's expression softened slightly, perhaps sensing an opening for reconciliation. But, I continued, partnership requires mutual respect. And tonight has made it clear that you see this as a transaction where you purchase access to my innovations while I purchase access to your social circle. That's not partnership. That's feudalism with better lawyers. The ballroom remained eerily quiet. Even the servers had stopped moving, standing frozen along the walls like witnesses to a historical moment. 300 of Manhattan's most powerful people watched silently as nearly $1 billion in business evaporated over dinner conversation. "What exactly are you saying, Richardson?" Harrison asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. I held up the contract one final time, making sure everyone in the ballroom could see it clearly. The signature page, the terms we'd negotiated, the partnership that would have transformed both our companies and potentially the entire renewable energy sector. I'm saying that some things are more valuable than money, Harrison. Dignity, self-respect, the knowledge that you've remained true to your principles, even when compromise would have been more profitable. Without another word, I began tearing the signature page in half. The sound of ripping paper echoed through the silent ballroom like a gunshot. Gasps rippled through the crowd as they realized what they were witnessing. Not just the end of a business negotiation, but the public rejection of everything their world represented. I let the pieces of the contract fall onto the white tablecloth like confetti. $900 million, 18 months of work, years of building toward this moment, reduced to scraps of paper scattered among the crystal glasses and silver serving pieces. "Mr. Richardson," Victoria's voice was barely a whisper, "you can't be serious." "I've never been more serious in my life." I reached into my jacket and pulled out my phone, opening the contact for my attorney. With deliberate care, I typed out a brief message. "Deal is off. We'll explain later. Please draft termination notice for Sterling Industries. Send tonight." The soft chime of the sent message seemed impossibly loud in the silent ballroom. Harrison Sterling stared at the torn pieces of contract, his face cycling through expressions of shock, anger, and something that might have been respect. "You realize what you're walking away from." "I realize exactly what I'm walking away from," I replied. "The question is, do you realize what you just lost?" I straightened my bow tie and looked around the ballroom one final time. 300 faces stared back at me, some shocked, some appalled, some perhaps grudgingly admiring. In the morning, they'd all have stories to tell about the night the upstart from Queens walked away from $900 million rather than accept his place in their carefully ordered world. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the marble floors, "thank you for a truly educational evening. I've learned more about the nature of wealth and power tonight than in all my years of business school." I nodded politely to Dr. Walsh and Margaret Foster, the only people at the table who'd shown any discomfort with how the evening had unfolded. Then I turned and walked toward the ballroom's exit, my footsteps echoing off the painted ceiling as conversations slowly resumed behind me. The October air hit my face like a slap as I stepped out of the Plaza Hotel onto Fifth Avenue. Manhattan's evening energy swirled around me. Taxis honking, pedestrians hurrying past, the distant sound of music from some rooftop party. The contrast with the rarefied atmosphere I'd just left was stark and somehow cleansing. My phone buzzed almost immediately. Text messages from colleagues who'd heard through the business grapevine that something had happened at the Sterling Gala. Then calls, first from my attorney, David Chen, who'd received my message about terminating the deal. Then from board members who'd gotten wind of the situation through their own networks. I let them all go to voicemail. For the first time in 18 months, I had absolute clarity about what I'd done and why. The questions, concerns, and inevitable second-guessing could wait until morning. The walk back to my apartment on the Upper East Side gave me time to process what had just happened. 18 months of negotiations destroyed in a single evening. $900 million, walked away from over-dinner conversation. From a purely financial perspective, it was insane. From any rational business standpoint, it was career suicide. So why did I feel lighter than I had in years? My doorman, Miguel, greeted me with his usual smile. "Evening, Mr. Richardson. How was the gala?" "Educational," I replied, and he chuckled as if I'd made a joke. My apartment felt different as I walked through it. The Pollock painting Sarah had insisted we buy, the view of Central Park that had seemed so important when we'd purchased the place, the home office where I'd spent countless nights working on the Sterling deal. All of it suddenly felt like props in someone else's life. I poured myself 3 fingers of scotch, the good stuff, a bottle Harrison Sterling had actually given me when we'd first shaken hands on the preliminary agreement, and sat in my leather chair overlooking the park. The irony of drinking his whiskey while contemplating the destruction of our partnership wasn't lost on me. My phone buzzed with another call. This time it was Maria, calling from her home in Brooklyn. "Please tell me the rumors aren't true," she said without preamble. "Which rumors specifically? That you tore up the Sterling contract at their gala in front of 300 people. The rumors are accurate." Silence on the other end of the line. Maria had been with me through every stage of building the company. She'd watched me work 16-hour days, sacrifice personal relationships, and pour every ounce of energy into growing GreenTech Solutions. She knew what the Sterling deal meant, not just financially, but as validation of everything we'd worked toward. "David, what happened?" I told her everything. The veiled insults about my background, the calculated humiliation over dinner etiquette, the clear message that I would be a junior partner in every sense, despite bringing the crucial technology to the table. As I spoke, I could hear her occasionally inhaling sharply or muttering under her breath in Spanish. "Those pretentious bastards," she finally said when I'd finished. "Forgive my language, but that's exactly what they are. You did the right thing." "Did I?" I asked, surprised by how much I needed her validation. $900 million, Maria. Enough to secure the company's future, provide for our employees, fund research for the next decade. David, in all the years I've worked for you, have you ever made a decision based purely on money? I considered the question. No. Then why start now? Besides, she continued, something tells me that walking away from Sterling Industries isn't going to be the end of the story. She was right, of course. By the time I woke up the next morning, my phone had accumulated dozens of messages. Some were from competitors who'd heard about the public dissolution of the Sterling deal and wanted to discuss their own partnerships. Others were from journalists asking for comment on what several were already calling the $900 million walkaway. But the most interesting calls were from other technology companies, renewable energy firms, and even investment banks who saw opportunity in Sterling Industries' sudden need for alternative partners. I spent the morning in my office working through the messages with Maria's help. By lunch, we'd identified 3 potential partners who could provide manufacturing and distribution capabilities comparable to what Sterling Industries had offered, along with 2 investment groups interested in funding an entirely different approach to scaling our technology. "Mr. Richardson," Maria knocked on my office door around 2 o'clock. "There's a Harrison Sterling on line 1. He says it's urgent." I stared at the blinking light on my phone for a long moment before picking up. "Harrison Richardson." His voice was carefully controlled, but I could hear the strain underneath. "I think we need to talk. I thought we said everything that needed saying last night. What happened at the gala was..." He paused, and I could almost hear him.